We are live.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We are going to walk through H11, a bill that was introduced last year that we took some testimony on. And so we're going to get a little refresher from Legislative Council and talk in particular about a section of the bill that might or might not be relevant. We're not sure, and that's why we're talking about it, to our testimony this week about consolidated communications retirement of its legacy system. So, Maria, are you? I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Halloran, Roland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Brent Buckner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
All righty. Whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Maria Royal with Legislative Council. It's nice to see you again this session. We're going to talk about H11, which we did review a little bit last year, and you did take some testimony on it. So just kind of a general refresher, but at any point, if you want to delve into details on any of these sections, please slow me down.
Okay.
And we can do that. I think it's actually the last section 3 of the bill, that was just alluded to, that might be relevant to your conversations and hearings about consolidated and notice.
Great.
Transitions. So, with that being said, and I'm noticing that my battery, for some reason, or my internet connection keeps shutting off. So if I might this might go off.
Okay.
But hopefully it'll stay there. Hopefully it all works. But so the bill is on the committee's webpage if you just search H11. And also under H11, you can see there's a tab that has the witnesses if you want to just see who spoke about the bill last session, what their written testimony was. Great. So very generally, Section 1 of this bill creates a new subchapter in Chapter 63 of Title IX. Chapter 63 is known as the Vermont Consumer Protection Act. It has a number of provisions. It's a general law, applies to all businesses in the state. There are very specific statutory provisions that apply to specific industries like propane dealers, etc. And then there are full subchapters within this chapter that apply to specific areas like lead removal, harmful toxic materials, right? So this would be a whole new subchapter specific to broadband. And so I'm just going to read the purpose because that kind of gives you the overall purpose of the bill. So this is the purpose of the subchapter. The purpose of this subchapter is to promote a thriving broadband market in Vermont, free of anti-competitive, unfair, deceptive, or misleading practices in order to protect the public and to encourage fair and honest competition. I won't go through all the findings unless you would like me to, but so part of what is discussed here has to do with the market in Vermont. As you know, there are rural areas where consumers don't have a lot of options in terms of their broadband connection. That's obviously changing. It's an evolving market. So some of the provisions here are to study the market at all times and understand whether providers are using their market dominance to either prevent competition or take advantage of consumers who don't have a choice. So that's one aspect of it. And then there are very specific things which we'll look at. Broadband providers shall not engage in these very specific unfair practices. So one of the issues that came up also last year was who would be the right regulator, enforcer of provisions like this. You've heard from the Attorney General's office. that kind of felt like they weren't so sure that they were the right entity. You also, and I'm not gonna summarize everything that was said, I don't remember everything, but just to
Right.
kind of give you some of the things that you heard. And you also heard that some of these practices, because the existing law applies generally to unfair business practices, some of the things that are specifically itemized here would likely or may fall under the existing law. So there was a lot of discussion about what are the specific harms here that wouldn't be captured, that would make, justifies moving forward. So before I get to the itemized prohibited practices, I just wanted to mention there is a provision on net neutrality here. As you know, Vermont requires any provider that contracts with the state to abide by net neutrality provisions. And you did hear from the Agency of Administration last year. They are the ones who promulgated Rule 3.5, which is the rule that applies to any procurement of goods and services on behalf of the state. So there is now language in there that specifies if it's for internet service, the provider has to comply with net neutrality standards. So that's being enforced now. And what this would do is make all providers in the state have to comply with net neutrality. I don't know how many other states have done this. I know California was the big one because that's where there was a lot of litigation and ultimately the law was upheld and is being enforced currently. So as I mentioned, this very specific unfair deceptive acts or practices that are specific to broadband and identified here: failing to provide a consumer with service that meets or exceeds the characteristics offered and sold to the consumer's location. So basically the marketing, that they can't market something that they are not capable of providing. There was some, I think both the department and maybe public knowledge talked about maybe refining this a little bit and making sure that, for example, if they provide customer premises equipment, that equipment has to be capable of meeting whatever that standard speed was sold to the consumer. So I think this is one of those sections that might need a little work. And please tell me if I'm going too slow, if it's too weedy for right now, maybe. I'm feeling like I'm getting a little bit.
We're okay.
Okay. So another unfair prohibited practice: failing to reimburse the consumer for installation costs with any service that is discontinued or that did not meet or exceed the minimum performance characteristics that were sold to the location. Engaging in marketing or promotional practices that misrepresent the actual terms and conditions of the service plan or tend to mislead or deceive an actual or prospective consumer. Excessive termination fees. So if consumer does want to switch providers, they're not then hit with a large fee that makes it prohibitive, cost prohibitive. Subdivision 5, charging equipment or service fees that do not reasonably correlate with the cost of the broadband service that's provided. And so this is getting at, kind of the junk fees that might attach to a bill. So when you purchase a service and they tell you how much the service costs, and then there are additional fees that one might presume are already included in the cost of service, that a company would be prohibited for doing that. That should all be folded into the cost of service so that consumers understand what they're contracting for. 6 is just to make sure that internet service providers accurately report their information about where they provide service so that the Department of Service has accurate maps of what locations are currently served. And then obviously if they violate their own privacy, security, or network management practices, that would be a violation. And then 8, imposing a predatory data cap or data cap as further defined. So this was the issue. There was some conversation about this. Some providers sell plans that have data caps. And I think what you heard first from the department was it doesn't really make sense to have data caps at all. In other words, it's a way of charging more for different levels of service that has no impact on network management. Because a data cap doesn't restrict you time of day, so there's no way of knowing, is there going to be congestion? And that's why you're restricted. It has nothing to do with that. It's just a data cap. It really doesn't have anything to do with network management. So that was kind of one thing that you heard. Also, you heard the FCC in 2024 initiated, I think it's a notice of inquiry regarding data caps dealing with this very issue. When is it appropriate? What kind of for a provider to impose data caps, which might be arbitrary if the network can handle the capacity. So I just wanted to flag that as I don't know, and I don't know the status. I think it might be on hold, but I'm not actually sure. I did try to find out an update of where the federal proceeding is. And then the next section is just about consumer complaints, really trying to get a better handle on what those complaints are. Some complaints go to the Attorney General's office, Consumer Assistance Program. Thank you. Other complaints go to the Department of Public Service under CAFI. So wanting to have greater coordination and kind of one portal or at least one mechanism so that both parties understand what the complaints are. There is kind of I think an informal agreement between the AG's office and the department about referring certain complaints to each other. But anyway, this is trying to get at, let's have one database so that the state understands what the total complaints are, what the nature of them, the disposition, and so on. So then the next section, line 17, monitoring competition. This kind of gets at what I was talking about before. The Attorney General, under the Consumer Protection Act, has the authority to enforce anti-competitive practices, antitrust type of behaviors. And so this is just kind of drawing upon their general knowledge and authority in this area to focus on the broadband sector for the reasons I mentioned before, making sure there are not unfair practices between providers, that there's an ability for new entrants into the market, they're not being boarded, and also that consumers are in a position to exercise their rights without being beholden to one provider in particular. And so part of doing that, there's a reference here to broadband consumer labels. This was part of the investment in my gosh, how can I actually forget that the law? IIJA, thank you. That established the BEAD program. Also required providers to have what's called the broadband consumer label, which is like a nutrition label that you would find on a food product that just very explicitly and simply tells a customer what the costs are, what the fees are. And it's meant to not only inform consumers about a particular service, but also so that they can comparison shop easily. So this is asking the Attorney General to kind of look at those labels for specific areas and in part make sure that underserved or marginalized communities are not being charged higher prices, that there's basically the same services are offered throughout the state. There's no unfair discrimination going on. And as part of that, providers are asked to include information about the services that they offer in the state. The number of service plans, both wired and wireless, the median and mean price, the number of years they've been in business, all of their broadband availability data that goes on the mapping so that the AG can get a real very specific understanding of what the market looks like. And then just a requirement that there's no perjury in the reporting of that information. The next provision is transparency. This is similar to the label, but basically that the providers make very clear what their practices are for network management, security, and privacy. This is available to consumers so that they can understand the service that they're purchasing, and also it's forwarded to the Attorney General. Again, trying to give as much information as possible to the Attorney General to understand. The next section, keep Vermonters connected. This is very similar to the federal pledge. It was voluntary during COVID. Keep Americans protected or connected. But what this is basically codifying that and saying in Vermont, if there is a declared state of emergency, that in that situation that individuals could not be kicked off their broadband service. So basically codifying that for the state. So then just investigations, enforcement, are similar to what's permitted now under the Consumer Protection Act. Provision that's, requires the relevant entity, state entity, AG's office, Department of Public Service, Vermont State Broadband Board, to just share information for purposes of this bill. There is a provision that allows the Attorney General to basically bill back, in other words, impose an assessment on providers for their costs that they incurred to do all this work. And it's very similar to a provision that the Commissioner of Financial Regulation has with respect to, I think it's the insurance industry. Confidentiality, information proprietary can't be disclosed, an annual report that comes to you, the General Assembly, reporting back all the information that's learned, and any recommendations for improving conditions in the state. Rulemaking authority, other laws are not limited in any way because of this law. That doesn't supersede other forms of recourse that might be available. Provisions are severable, so if there's anything held unconstitutional, one provision, the other provisions would still take effect. And the authority, the 10th Amendment, the state's authority to exercise its police powers to protect the public. So that's a broad overview. I hope I didn't go too fast on all of that, but I think this is the section that, in light of some of your, the testimony you heard today about consolidated, might be relevant to that discussion. So these are consumer protections that are specific to VoIP service. So what this requires is the Commissioner of Public Service to establish a program for monitoring the health and public safety risks associated with the use of VoIP in Vermont, particularly during originating carrier or electric power outages. So the provider of VoIP service, they have an outage, or if there's an electric outage that impacts the availability of VoIP service, if they're not line powered, they require batteries. So if the electricity goes out, the VoIP service will also go out unless they have some kind of battery backup. And we'll talk about that in a minute because there are requirements now.
So what we're talking about here is Vermonters who only have VoIP, that's their only way of getting a call out. And if the power goes out and they don't have battery backup.
That's definitely part of what's being looked at here. So right now, the originating carriers, the electric companies, they have to quarterly submit outage reports to the 911 board, right? We're required to do that by rule. The legislature required that rulemaking, I think, 2022. And so specifically what the commissioner is going to look at is, are there areas of the state particularly prone to carrier or power outages and assess whether locations in those areas have access to facilities-based fixed voice service. So an old copper legacy network. Do they also some people might have both options, or whether they have access over a cell phone provider. So really trying to hone in on, are there areas that don't have cell service and the legacy provider no longer offers service over a copper line powered. So their only option is VoIP service. Because in the event of a power outage, they potentially be the most vulnerable in an emergency situation.
So I do not think we have included this here, but there are areas of the state where emergency services, public safety is pretty far away. That's not a factor in this.
No.
So I wonder if there's a way to think about that.
Absolutely. And if you want to hear more about the reporting that's done, Barb Neal is the executive director of the 911 board, and she can kind of aggregate the information at least and share that with you to the extent. Yeah. Thanks. So then, so this is just making sure that the VoIP providers comply with federal requirements about backup power obligations. So, and those cross references might need to be updated, but what they're intended to get at, so right now, I think it was in 2015, VoIP providers needed to give consumers the option of purchasing backup power that lasted for 8 hours. Then I think it was in 2019, the FCC required providers to provide a second option to consumers, which they would have to purchase, I believe, although different providers might handle differently in terms of charges. But backup power that would last for 24 hours. So this is what they're required to offer or provide to their consumers.
8 hours.
8 hours
or
minimum.
24 hours.
And yes, a second option of 24 hours.
And are there any parameters set by the feds on the price competitive on the price of it?
I don't think so. Let me just double check on that. I don't know that there are other, and like I said, different providers. I don't know if they all charge or if they all charge the same amount, but I can try to find that out. I'll just also mention though the Vermonters that might not enjoy the benefit of being offered backup power are those Vermonters who had pre-existing service. So the FCC requirements apply, say that you need to offer this at the point of sale. So if you already had service, they might not proactively reach out to you, but they have to make some attempts to disclose what's available, what the risks are in the event of a power outage. But that's just one thing to think about. And that's related to subdivision 4, which is developing consumer education, community outreach initiatives to make sure all Vermonters understand what the risks are and what their options are in the event of a power outage. And then finally, this again, part of the commissioner study, establishment of this program is to make recommendations to you about any other additional consumer protections that should be available in Vermont, potentially including additional backup power requirements that supplement the FCC's federal requirements, potentially providing financial assistance to low-income consumers for purchasing backup power equipment and any installation costs that might be charged, and additional consumer outreach, and anything else the commission deems appropriate. And then finally, the commissioner has the assistance of the 911 board, the Attorney General's office, Department of Public Safety, and the Public Safety Communications Task Force and VLCT. So trying to really understand geographically where the vulnerable spots are in addition.
So Maria, this morning, as part of the testimony, we heard about some voluntary behavior changes that may come about through an MOU. And I asked about if we introduced language in statute, if that would be supported. There was a sense that that might be federally preempted. And this was really around notice to the E911 board and to the Department of Public Service, who are not required to be noticed through the federal law. But, you know, the PUC and the governor are, you know, the form of notice. I don't know if there's anything we can do there to ensure that
It's greater notice beyond what the FCC requires.
yeah.
Yeah, so I have to, let me look into that a little bit more. I don't know if there's just a kind of a general field preemption. I don't think there is, but whether there are, but I only need to double check that.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember what we heard this morning. She said they had reached out to
PUC governor,
the governor's office and the PUC
Secretary of War.
and the Secretary of War. Sorry, Secretary of Defense. And was that, and did she say that those are the three requirements?
That they are.
Okay, so the Secretary of Defense, the PUC or whatever's the equivalent in each state, and the governor's office
And their customers, of course.
and their customers. But that is what the federal law requires right now. Okay.
Okay, let me look at that in greater detail, see what.
So what
Right.
we're wondering is if we could pass something that goes above and beyond that in terms of notification and outreach, that wouldn't just be preempted by, well, you can't do this.
Like sending a 130-page application to the governor's ceremonial office as notice for Vermonters that this is happening.
Did somebody say something? Did you say something? So,
Are you hearing voices? Too early in the session.
Right. That's a little scary. Remember that one day? It was the first day we knew something was wrong. Okay, back to the topic at hand.
So I do have a question.
Yeah.
If this is a pause in the voices. Yeah.
Let's not make that a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to remember where we left this last year. This ran by the crossover deadlines and we just dropped it and going to other things. Is that what happened?
Yeah, but I think there is more. I mean, in my recollection, we have a lot of conflicting testimony.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I'm
so,
just looking at the written testimony from CCI.
yeah,
Industry does not like this.
Yeah.
no, and the AG wasn't wild about it.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I just, nor was the department, yeah. But
Here we are.
here we are. I mean, section 3 is, I'm interested. I guess I'm curious to know whether we could proactively do any of this or whether it's just going to be preempted by federal law and it's all a waste of time.
Yeah, I can find out. I'll research that.
Because it doesn't seem to me to be that onerous, of a thing to require a company to do to have a more robust
And just
public notification
if
process.
for some reason that we're preempted, and I don't know the answer to it, there may be other workarounds, like notice to the department that can then provide general notice. I mean, might be easiest to get, you know, to receive something from the provider in mail, but I'm just saying there are other options that the state might be able to do that doesn't impose obligations on the provider if there were a preemption.
Yeah.
So Maria, can you just remind me that, so federal law cannot preempt all of, the states have some ability to protect their, so
Absolutely.
can you help
Well,
fine tune a little bit on that?
yes, so Congress has authority over interstate commerce. And to the extent Congress wants to pass a law on a particular area, preempting the state, given the supremacy clause, Congress can do that. So the question here is, Congress has delegated rulemaking of the FCC, which is the basis for the FCC backup power requirements. So one, did Congress say anything about preemption? If not, is there anything in the federal law that implicitly preempts what a state might do? And then finally, if a state law conflicts with the field that's regulated by the FCC, which I don't think it's field preemption here, or state passes a law that unduly burdens interstate commerce, if there's no explicit preemption, those are the types of things. But this issue is probably one of like the biggest issues right now, because with everything being interstate in commerce, particularly what's done online, what's left for states? What's reserved to the states? Even if Congress is trying to preempt, everything, is there some residual? We need to act in the best interests of our public. So these powers of the state, interstate commerce powers of Congress, delegated to the applicable agencies, these are the type of things. And if there isn't an explicit preemption and the state law serves a legitimate purpose, it's narrowly tailored, doesn't unduly burden interstate commerce, then it's likely okay. So it's usually a very fact-specific inquiry.
Questions for Maria? You're nothing. So it's reassuring.
I was just coming.
This is gonna be bad.
Maria, thank you so much. I think that we can go offline.
Okay. So
All right, so